does comedy.
And I'm Adrienne Pickering, an actor.
And yes, we're sisters.
Yeah.
And this is our podcast.
This is a podcast where we're
Called
going to... Is this a
It's a Job? Where we dissect and interrogate, in a nice way.
In a really polite, kind, warm way.
We talk to
creative
people.
artists working and carving out some kind of existence in Australia.
Because how do you do it? You know?
How do you do it? It can be a bit stressful sometimes, but also really fulfilling, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's what we want to find out.
We'll talk to them. Actors, comedians, writers, artists, directors, filmmakers.
You
Why
name
do we
it.
do it?
Why do we do it?
Is this a job? I don't know. So
Is this a job? I'm really hoping this might be a job.
my rent's due. Anyway, so
What's
all right.
going on? What's going on, Raewyn Picks?
Look, getting back into work, doing some things. I've cut
How's your hand?
Yeah, I cut the tendons in my
Oh,
hands. It's had a bit of a
better,
weird
but gosh, it looks
angle.
pretty munted
But-
still.
Thanks. But yeah, at least the farming stuff I haven't been able to do, but like a lot of the comedy, I'm still getting up and
Do
kind
you
of
miss the
addressing it a little
animals?
bit. Yeah.
Are you getting feedback? Are they like,
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Although the other day,
so-and-so's-
like one of the the goats gave birth, and it was
Oh,
a
you
bit
missed
difficult
it.
though, and so they had to like go internal and pull it out, and I was like, well,
That's
I
normally
definitely
you.
couldn't have done that with my with the
You
cast. Can you
couldn't.
imagine going into it with the cast
Whoa,
on? And
that dough would not be
no,
appreciative
she would
of that.
not enjoy it.
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that
well,
was
there
someone
you
else
go.
that did it.
Did
But
they
yeah.
cope okay.
Yeah, everything's all fine. It was
Oh.
just a big boy.
Well,
That
yeah.
happens in the goat world.
Work, mama goat.
But yeah, so all okay. But anyway, still doing luckily stand up, you can still stand there and
Stand up
talk
and make
without
jokes.
without too much of a hand.
And maybe some
So,
more material.
feeling optimistic this week. How about you?
Yeah, look, trying to be optimistic.
You don't even have a munted hand.
I don't have a munted hand. Yeah, look, everything's pretty chipper.
That's
I
good.
guess. I don't know. I'm just feeling a bit dreamy right now. It's the end of the year.
Yeah, it's the end of the year.
I feel
Exciting
yeah,
time.
It is. I'm really ready for a bit of family time, bit of summer family time. A bit like
Yeah.
less work, less sort of being like pulled from pillar to post. I just feel a little bit like worn out with life.
Yeah.
Everyone,
I think everyone does. It's
Yeah,
the
that's
end
it.
of it's
That's it.
December. But then it's
I
like
feel really lucky. Like everything is
Yeah.
where it should be, but I just feel a bit warmed down
Yeah.
and a bit sort of. Did I say warmed down?
warm down. We're going well.
Warming down and warming up. I'm worn out.
Well, I think we're pretty warmed up. And so is our guest today. How about that for a segue?
Hey, how you going?
Welcome.
He's warmed up. They're very
Wasn't sure where to jump in. I was
Been
like,
limbering
No,
up in the
that's
corner.
great.
yeah.
Ready to.
but Ben Searle, lovely to have you.
Yeah,
here.
that's me.
You're
Thank you.
a-
Thanks for having me.
You're
Thanks for
a
coming in,
wonderful
Ben.
friend of mine, but also a
you.
comedian and a musician. Would you still think, are you still a musician? You dabble,
I
but you're not in a
dabble-
band currently.
No, I mean, that was, I used to play a lot of music. And then very recently, I was going to fill in for my friend's band and then absolutely cooked it.
Oh
'cause
no! So did you did do it?
I didn't end up doing it because I was going to fill in. I used to play bass and I was going to fill in on bass. And
Yeah.
I sold my bass like a while ago.
Oh,
and
so you didn't even
So
have
it'd
it
been
to
a long
practice.
time.
Well, I was using
Didn't
his
have an
bass,
instrument.
and I realized he's a way better bass player than I ever was,
Oh.
because he wrote all the songs and was just gonna sing
Yeah.
and not play bass, and then it got to the band practices, and I was like, oh, these guys are pretty
I can't
good.
do this.
You're like,
Wow.
whereas for me, it was like I still really love live music, and
Yeah.
I go to a lot of gigs
Yeah.
when I can, and I was like, oh, this is how I enjoy this now. I don't. I was
interesting.
like, so
It's
that was a
kind of
big
shifted. You don't like have to keep up your chops at home and be like
No, I think
doing it that way.
and towards the end, the last band I played in, because I was doing stand up and bands for a while together, and sort of neither was kind of going that well. Like in the sense of like,
It's a lot of nighttime stuff, isn't it? Like how much can
Yeah.
you really
Yeah.
squeeze in?
and a lot of admin
Only
and a lot
7
of
nights a week.
yeah, and it sort of worked at the start because I was starting out in comedy, and when you start out in comedy, it's mostly during the week, and you kind of work up to being on the weekends.
Yeah.
And then band stuff was always mostly on the weekends.
Weekends. Yeah.
And then it got to this point where I guess comedy was going okay, and I was starting to get a few weekend gigs, and I think there was a comedy festival where I went from a stand-up show to playing a
gig.
show in a
Oh,
band.
in the one night.
And,
so just, yeah.
Living the dream.
Yeah, sort of.
Oh,
but,
wow. ...
I weirdly got someone from Beat Magazine was at the band gig and absolutely tore me a new one because of like this guy
a
said on
review.
stage that he'd come from a show and he talked so much during the sets. I don't know why he was talking so much in the songs. And it was like, yeah, because I want to just do stand up the whole time. Like, but it was kind of part of the bit in the band. But that's a roundabout way of saying that, like, I still really love music, and I have this thing in the back of my head that loves mucking around with it, but it is nice to just have it as
a side
thing.
side hustle.
Well, I would say not a hustle,
Not a
just
hustle.
actually just a
So that
hobby.
you can enjoy
A pleasure.
it.
Yeah, because it's like music stuff was that for me for such a long time.
Yeah.
A couple of years.
Like was like a grind. Like
yeah, and
like,
you're playing shows interstate,
trying,
and you're not making very much money, and then you're trying to put releases out and pay for recording, and then the last band I played in just kind of fell apart, and then that kind of ended up being a good thing in the end because I think then I really dove straight into stand up and got a lot out of it, and put more time into that. But now I do a podcast with a mate of mine where we talk about music and stuff, and we interview a lot of young bands and stuff. And it's like, oh, it's a nice way to still be connected to it.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm trying to like align my comedy with that in the sense, like not making jokes about it, but it's like, oh, this is more.
It's a part of your personality.
Yeah. And it's just like, oh, this is who I am. And if you're into the same stuff as me, maybe you might like my comedy as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been an interesting journey because a lot of people are like, why don't you write comedy songs? And I was like, I can't imagine anything worse.
Also, like your style of like music love is heavy metal, right?
Yeah, like
so
punk and hardcore
there's not a
and
lot
heavy.
of like heavy metal musicals out there, is there?
No,
like-
well, not yet.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a
There's
gap in
a
the
lot
market.
of like, ukulele, keyboard kind of, light comedy, but you could be the first one that really does the dark bass
it's a-
screamo.
Yeah, it's a fine line, I think, like between, but maybe there's like a Weird Al kind of crossover there
Yeah.
somewhere.
Maybe like you were saying, you don't need to cross over. Like you found your identity within the culture. And that's what you love, and that's what that's where you feel home, and that's what you really relate to. And you don't need to be strumming away and practicing your bass lines.
And I found that I just enjoy being at the shows. Like I get a real kick out of seeing the younger bands in that scene because it's like, I remember what it was like when I was kind of starting out, and that style of music, it's very much needs young people in it to keep it going because it's like very energetic and it's like very like
these old guys with bad backs.
yeah.
But
Can't
isn't
quite.
there like there are a lot of old rockers out there who still
Definitely
really
rockers,
give it a go,
probably
right?
more-
But would you say
Not in the punk world?
more the
Or-
punk hardcore world because it's very like this is niche music stuff now.
Love
Which is
it.
so
It's very interesting. Yeah.
it's very much like it needs young people coming into it to kind of keep it alive, I suppose. Like it needs that
to make
energy.
it evolve, or do you think just like they're not going to die of a heart attack while performing? do you
Well,
mean physical?
I think it's
youth,
pretty
or
like
do you mean
angsty
that-
sort of music, and like I think it needs that kind of youth, like frustrated
Oh,
energy.
yeah. Whereas, you get to an age and you're just like,
You need
I'm
that
pretty content.
testosterone.
Yeah.
your 20s
Yeah,
testosterone.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't need you, Mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or Dad.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's
I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Yeah, so having the podcast with my mate has been a great outlet for that,
Yeah.
and and it's been really good to enjoy it in that
yeah,
way,
and a
and
different with less pressure on it. Maybe
Yes.
with less of like being like I want to make it as a musician. You're just like, oh, I just like it.
yeah, and
Being
I think,
more of a hobby. I think that's what we've talked about with some people where like sometimes the hobby is a bit more fulfilling or like it's just less pressure on it than it being like, oh, I need to like make it and be the best and make money. And
I think in our society there's such a push to like monetize things. Like
Yes.
people are always saying, whenever you do anything good, like you make something or you make a cake, or they're like, you should sell that or something. Or, I do a lot of sewing and knitting and stuff, which I talk about all the time. But yeah, people are often like, you should sell that and you could make a business of this. And in some ways, like you think like, oh yeah, maybe I could just spend my days doing that. But I don't think we always need to find a way of monetizing it. Like,
it might take away from it.
We can just really enjoy things without having to make an industry out of it.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that kind of takes some of the joy out of it as well.
Yeah,
because
for
I think
sure.
it's so, like, I kind of toy with that in comedy. Is that now that I do it so much, I don't watch a lot of comedy live. Like I watch a lot of specials and things like that too. But other than, I notice that I do it more when I'm interstate. Like if I'm going to do gigs, I'll hang around because I don't really have anywhere to be.
Watch
so
the other people in the lineup.
Whereas here, I'm like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah.
I got to go be on the couch at home. Like,
Yeah.
but I guess that's also about managing your energy and things like that. Like you have to do a bit of that. But I was like, oh, I should make more of an effort to. Yeah, it was such a thing for me to, I used to just go and watch comedy. That was a thing that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
But maybe that was because there was always that thing in the back of my head that was like, I'm going to do this. Like,
Wow.
I think someone said there's no comedy fans, just people who want to be open mic
Yeah.
comedians.
Yeah. That is true.
Maybe that's just like getting old or like growing up too. It's just like not putting the pressure on us to just like achieve and work all the time. It's just realizing like, I want to go home and be on the couch now, and I've done this part of, like fulfilling my aspirations, and now I'm going to go do this, and just like not caring so much about what you should be doing and just doing more of like what makes you happy, which is talking about music.
Yeah, it's such a trap to fall into, like, I guess that comparing yourself to other people, particularly in comedy, it's like, oh, this person's doing that, I'm not doing this. And,
especially if you're like, comparing like timelines, kind of like, oh, we started around the same time, but look, they're getting this gig or like something like that. It's
it's everyone's kind of running their own race. And I think it's also, I found that at the times where, sort of pre-COVID and a little bit afterwards when we could gig again, I was going really hard, but the rest of my life was a mess. And it was like,
I think the whole world was like that.
And I found I really dove into things. But then I was like, oh, I need to have this external life to comedy to have things to talk about, to have, to be
that's the thing.
a person that can relate to other people.
Right.
And to have interesting things that's not just like, oh, on the tram on the way here, I saw this.
Yeah, or I was flying to a gig.
Exactly.
That's interesting, isn't it? You need the interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah. And I think like, and you don't want to have to mine everything from your life for material, but sort of finding that balance where things are.
Sure.
Like I find that at the moment I'm not working full time. And I have worked full time for a long time, but just working a regular day job made it more. Things were coming up and things were. Whereas now it's like I'm just sitting around writing, but you need inputs. To write about.
Yeah, you need like inspiration.
So you talk about working. One of the questions we often ask is what would you put like on the census form drop down menu? Like
if someone's like
at the moment I'm sort of going through a bit of a or maybe I'm sort of close to the end of a bit of a transitional period with work and comedy and stuff, because I had been at a job full time for about 5 years.
A non-creative job. When
Yeah,
you say job.
I was like working for a childcare company doing rostering and staffing and things like that. Like,
so very much like an admin kind of like.
yeah. And then I moved up to like being a manager and was like running a team. And then, and I think it was like, oh, okay, this works well with comedy, because I could also work remotely a lot. So I'd go into state for gigs and I would just work during the day from wherever. And
was it something that like also you don't have to think about after 5? Like it's like you could log off mentally.
Yes and no. I think initially it was. So like, when I moved up to a management role, it was like
a bit more responsibilities and
a bit more like, I don't know. For me, I mean, it's a complicated feeling, because it was like I didn't actually like being a manager. But that was really the only way to earn more money.
Yeah.
But I just ethically, it doesn't sit very well with
So
me.
you wouldn't put manager on the drop-down menu?
I would have, like that. I think that's what's on my tax up until recently. But I found it. I found it a bit difficult, because I was like, the owners of this company are giving me more money to give me a bit more of the power to make sure these people do work. Then we really get into punk politics here. It started to feel a bit
conflict within.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I think, and then it was sort of this corporate culture of pushing to get more out of people and things like that. And I was like, oh, I actually don't like this.
Yeah.
But I think that's the tough thing as an artist, is like doing things that you are maybe not as comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because now it's also like trying to do a bit more like acting work in like ads and stuff. And it's like, okay, well, which ads am I willing to do?
Yeah.
And then there is also this other
like ethically.
and there's I guess the topic in comedy is like, gambling companies.
Yeah.
There's lots of money there.
I was talking about that this
And
morning.
it's like,
It's very topical, obviously.
Yeah.
I think it's a big thing for comedians, because that's where there's a lot of money.
So has that always been the case, or is it just the case now? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about in Australia the gambling ad ban for kids.
Maybe
all
it's
this
just
sort of
because
stuff.
it's a
Maybe
recent thing that's come up, and it's being like, more advertised, and there's more
scrutiny over the ethics
and
of
more of those
gambling
ads
and advertising
are
gambling.
looking for a funny, like they're doing a funny like ad as well.
There seems to be a lot more gambling like apps and stuff now as well. So there's lots of like, not only is there sports bet, there's like all these random little ones.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just like such a thing in, it's kind of this it's kind of this hidden thing in Australian culture that,
Though a lot of people actually gamble, but wouldn't realise they are.
Oh, big time. Like I think, particularly, you think about pokey revenue. Is there's some fact where there's more pokies in New South Wales than there are in like Nevada or something like that. Something weird. Like there's some fact like that. Like you go into every pub in Sydney and there's pokey machines, but I think. Anyway, really getting off topic here, but I think the moral quandary of your day job is like, I think for me at the moment, I'm like, okay, I have some goals in comedy, but do I go back to full-time work for a bit to make that happen?
Yeah. How do you supplement your life while comedy isn't quite making enough money?
Yeah.
To live off, really, like, because it's not, for a lot of people it's not a job. Like even people that like from outwardly they look quite successful, like they're on the gala, but they're still got a day job because it's not.
I think there's a real
in Australia it's really hard
scarcity mindset in Australia with comedy work. Like I think there's and I think you just have to work hard. Like there's a lot of people that go regional, because there's money there, or I guess you just got to try and build your own audience and really. And then it seems like it's a pretty full-on touring schedule. Like I think it's live performance is really the thing that makes money.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's still a lot of people getting out there, especially in rural or regional areas.
Yeah.
Or probably it's not the right description, regional.
Yeah, I think because there just isn't as much there. So if you are willing to go there, that
if you're willing to go there, it sounds
is it like
really
like tour?
taking your life into your own hands, going to Dubbo.
More meant the arduous drive.
Unlike the Melbourne Comedy Festival, it's a different audience.
Yeah, and I think maybe like you might have to adapt your act a little bit, and some people are maybe not willing to do that. It's I have heard this term of like an act not traveling well. Like it might work in the inner city Melbourne, but it's like you can't do jokes about the tram in outside of
anywhere
the
else.
CBD.
There would certainly be some performers that would do a lot better in regional areas because of their
and vice versa. It's interesting. So I think at the moment I'm really kind of.
Do you find yours travels well?
I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. Like I would say that I can be pretty city centric sometimes, but I think lately I've tried to make most of my jokes. I'm noticing that I'm leaning more into stories of like that have happened to me, so I've tried to make it. This thing happened to me, and I'm telling you about it, rather than hey, don't you find this? Yeah, and hopefully people can relate to the story that I'm telling. Yeah. So. It doesn't. So that's what I've been working on lately, and trying to be more myself and trying to. I'm not really like a topical comedian, although I want to try and have those skills. Like, so you sort of just try and develop little bits and pieces here and there. Yeah,
definitely.
But I think I realized that for me, I do need to also have that that steady work in terms of full-time or part-time, just because it is actually more conducive to being creative, because you're not. I find that at the moment I've been a bit stressed about money because I'm doing odd jobs here and there, and it's like, I'm not as creative because I'm spending so much energy thinking about that. Whereas when I was working full-time, I was time poor, but I'd be like, no worries, let's just fly and do this and do that. So it's such an interesting compromise.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something you just work out over time, really.
Yeah.
And at different times in your life, you'll probably do one thing will work and then the other one. You've done a bit of that. I've done a bit of that. Yeah.
It is interesting because you do see like the comedians who like that have the mindset of, well, like I've got to quit my day job, and the only way you can get better is to just like be obsessed with it and like go full bore. Like you have to put the time
actually
in.
really think that.
Yeah. That you like should.
Sorry, I just wasn't sure that was a joke.
I'm sure people like you, people like you, like actors, like outside of the comedy community. I'm sure other creative people and even in the music community, I'm sure they're like, they should probably quit their job so that they can invest the time into doing this, so that then they get the return, because if they don't do that, then they'll never have this as a as a career.
It's fraught
but
with,
it's I don't think it's for my
in my mind.
But I'm so interested in people that think like that, because it's not how I lean more towards, I guess, you're thinking solo of like, it's good to have something in the day to even just have that like better mental health of like, well, I know I've got that money, so it's less pressure. Like even if you are just thinking about it monetarily, but I actually really like my job on a farm, so I don't want to work towards giving that up necessarily. I like a balance of having both. Of like, and I think my mental health is a lot better for it. Like I'm not like trying to like, oh no, I have to give up everything or else I'll never be a successful comedian. But that mindset is out there that you're like, no, you've got to like do it.
And I suppose it's that thing of like, what does success look like for you?
Yeah.
And I guess there's such a like, finding what that is for you is like the challenge. I think, because
totally.
It's so easy to go like, well, this person's massive success is what everyone has to achieve. And it's like, it's actually just mathematically improbable that will happen. But you can find your own version of that. Yeah. And maybe, and I think now more than ever with online stuff, it's shown that, there are not the celebrities like there used to be.
Yeah.
Like there's a few, like there are the Taylor Swifts of the world, but then there are these niche Korean pop stars that no one's heard of, but they have a massive fan base and live off it.
Yeah.
But they can walk down the street and no one knows who they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like it's like these, you know, you're a famous person within your realm or thing. So it's understanding that looks different now. It's not just like, because even TV is not, you know, you think being on TV used to be like the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Someone can be on TV and no one knows who they are now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like you would think that.
Also, you can make a show like, you know, there was that great example of Schitt's Creek years ago where hadn't they made like 4, you know, that comedy series from Canada. It had made 4 series or something.
Yeah.
Nobody knew anything about it. And then all of a sudden, was it just before COVID or like during COVID? America discovered it, and then it just like won all the Emmys and became the most successful show, and everyone on that show, whereas they'd just been making this kind of goofy old show in Canada for years. And that kind of happens too.
It's been interesting seeing that happen in music now with TikTok, that bands, there's this band called Super Heaven who I used to listen to back in the day, and a song of theirs has gone viral with like young TikTok kids.
Yeah.
And
like an Australian band.
No, they're from the States, but they were around and stopped, and they play in other bands now. And then that band has now become reactive because their songs, like younger kids have discovered their songs.
Oh, wow.
And like one of the guys is like, he has a podcast, and I was listening to it. And they're like, yeah, we're going to tour that band again. We're writing new music as that band because
amazing.
They discovered a new audience.
Yeah.
Like, and it's, you know, it's like, I guess, young kids discovering Joy Division or something like that. You know, it's just generational. Like,
it's kind of random though. I guess, I mean, there's obviously like a seed of something in that, music that is, you know, that is interesting to people. Otherwise it wouldn't be successful, but it is kind of random. Like even I'm sure they couldn't have predicted that.
I don't
in 20 years time there'll be a new technology. People will be consuming music differently, and then we'll make a heap of money and we'll tour again.
It's so bizarre.
It's so you can't really plan it sometimes, right? You just kind of sort of have to live with integrity and keep, I don't know, walking through the doors like we talk about, and like taking opportunities and following your heart to like lead an enriching life or whatever it is. And then it's sort of like,
it's bizarre.
There's no formula.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, I think you can only really just control what you can control, and I think as long as I think for me it's about trying to just be your most self and try and
definitely in comedy that's like that's how you, I guess, get better, or you find your own audience if you're your true self. Like it's
very important.
There's no way to
comedy, isn't it? I mean, there's
you're not gonna get an audience if you're just like emulating another comedian. I don't know. I think
so
you've got to
always felt like that, Ben, or like have you always felt sort of like it's very important to connect with yourself and your own individuality and your in terms of your comedy and your music? Have you always had that sense? Or
I think probably had the sense of it, but maybe not always been able to articulate it. I think it probably it's taken you know, you go through waves of it, and you're you know, talking to, you know, coming up to I think 10 years next year of doing stand up, and I've gone through so many different waves with it. And for me, it's like, you know, stand-up is so reflective of my personal life as well. Like I find that, you know, if things are not going well in the personal life, the comedy's not going well. And so I found that, all right, so if I'm being true to myself or talking about the things that I want to talk about, whereas I've had times where I'm like, I need to be like this to be successful, or I need to be like this. So like when I started, I used to I would, you know, I'd cover up my tattoos, and I would talk about, I'd try not to really, I wanted to be different to that. I guess I was maybe a bit burnt out by music stuff, so I wanted to sort of distance myself from it.
Or
music,
also that it's hard to make that relatable, even though you do now. But it's like, I guess it was such a learning thing. I mean, even like it's like anything that's individual. It's like with me, it was like a struggle to learn how to make coming from the country or working with farm animals like something that's not necessarily relatable, but something that is that can be connected to, even if you're not a part of it. Like watching you do stand up and talking about the punk scene, you're like, the way you like approach it and explain it, I guess, is a very easy I don't know
I think it's finding what the word is, but it's the commonality for people is, because I think it, for me, the punk stuff is like it's all just relationships to people and things happening, and it you can find like a thread. But I think it has been important to me to be myself as much as possible, and I think at times I lose that a bit, and you got to go like, all right, need to
come back,
bring back a little bit, and sometimes you just need to do that to maybe protect yourself a little bit, and sometimes like I've been too honest on stage, and I'm like, oh no, I don't actually want to share that.
Fine line.
Definitely.
I haven't
overshare.
Haven't processed that enough yet.
Can I get those medical records back, please?
Put that in the box.
So it is
tough learning.
And it's still at the end of the day a form of a character up there, I suppose. It's just an elevated version of yourself. But I think it's good to have that in a way, because I'm not it's still a performance. It's still I'm not one of those free speech guys up there. I gotta say everything that's in my head like that. That's not what I enjoy. I still think that stand up is something that's about connecting with people, and that's what I really enjoy about it. And so for me, it's like being true to yourself, and you go, all right, this creative outlet is really valuable to my life, and and at the end of the day, it is hard work, but it is supposed to be fun. And if it's not fun, something's like that's not to say it's not going to be hard at times, but it should be like if your life is in the toilet, it's like there's something not quite right. You can pull back a bit.
What is the part of it that is fun to you? Like, what do you really love about it when you think of like my favorite thing about doing?
I think it's that I think for me, as it has changed over the time, but it is about, I think, creating something like a joke where you go, I know the beats of this are going to make people laugh, and it's like. And I think about it when I was back in bands and writing songs, and I kind of wish I knew this back then, because I was saying on a podcast, we were talking to a band, that the band that I played in the last one, we didn't have a strong songwriter in the band in terms of musically. We were just kind of putting it together and going like, I guess this sounds right. Like none of us knew music theory and it meant that I think the songs were good, but they could have been a lot better. Whereas like in stand-up, I really love that process of working on something where I know that if I perform this in most circumstances, this is, there's going to be the laugh here, and being able to kind of elicit that reaction from people to go like, I think you're really going to enjoy this. And I think that's kind of the direction I've been going in comedy is, and the bit that I enjoy the most is like, all right, I've really worked on this thing, and it's going to be surprising and unexpected, and it's going to get this reaction out of people. So, I think that's what I've sort of distilled as what I enjoy the most out of it. Is kind of like, and it is such a live performance. Like, as much as we talk about got to put clips online, got to do this, that's marketing. That's separate. Like, that's building an audience, and that is its own thing. And it does serve into the live performance. But at the end of the day, it is about being in the room with people. And it's about, and I think for me, that measure of success thing, I would say that the thing that I still, as much as I enjoy the live performance in my own career, for me, it's still also a community, and it's about people. And I've met so many great people in my life, and I think when I started stand up, I was really looking for that, and I was quite a socially anxious person, and it's kind of it's really opened me up, and it's opened me up to this whole world of people that I would never have otherwise met. So I think for me, it's as much the live experience, but it's also the community around it. Because if we don't have each other, we don't really have much else. So that's
for sure.
A bit of a convoluted answer,
similar?
but
I'm very interested. Is it similar in the punk scene as well, of having that community, I guess?
I would
is it
say
a pretty small,
even
smallish scene in Australia?
It's growing. It's because pre-COVID, it kind of had when I was like maybe mid-20s, it sort of had its peak, and then it sort of dipped down, I guess, like less people were starting bands, and it was sort of a bit, that scene in particular was a bit dead before COVID. And then I think something just sort of people like, we want to play music, we want to get involved. So that's really grown. I'd say that the scene side of it, and, you know, going to shows and being at those events is like probably even stronger in that scene. And I think I enjoy the parallels. Like, it's about participating and being involved, not just on stage, but you're going to support other things as well. So I think in what I was talking about before, we're trying to go and watch more comedy where I'm not on. It's a bit of an odd thing, because you're like, oh, if I'm not performing, then why am I here, kind of thing. But it's about going and supporting, and you know, it is a community, and it only works if we help each other. Because it is so, like, you know, the reality is that arts in Australia is fucking hard. Like, it's so brutal. And there's not that much money, and there's not that many opportunities. That's why we see the same people on our TV that just hold on to those jobs, because there's not that many opportunities. So if you didn't have the community aspect of it, it would be pretty hard. Like,
we wish them well.
Yes.
God damn it.
Good on them.
Yeah.
Would you recommend this, like, career, this creative life? Like, obviously you find it fulfilling, but it's also incredibly hard. Do you think that's like I don't know, like a balance you would recommend? Or
I think what's interesting, I had a mate of mine reached out to me saying, like, hey, I've got this guy I know that does a bit of comedy stuff starting out.
Oh no.
Do you want to have a chat with him? Well, luckily he ended up being quite funny.
Oh, great.
And he
that's always a bit of a worry.
Yeah, he was a cartoonist initially, and has been doing, I guess, sort of more music comedy stuff. And I just met up with him to have a coffee, and, you know, we're very similarly aligned. Like, he was more in like electronic music stuff, but there's a bit of crossover with music stuff. So that's how we got connected. And we chatted for maybe 2 hours, and part of that conversation was like, you know, a bit similar to our conversation today, was, like, I think the biggest thing I've got out of it is that community side, and that, and there is you will go through all these roller coasters. And I checked in with him, and he's been doing some more open mics, and I said, oh, how you going? And he's like, if anything, my confidence is a bit down since doing those open mics. And I was like,
I was going to say, there's a period after you start where it's like, oh, this is like, I've got nothing good to say. I'm like,
brutal,
Well, because obviously when you're starting, I mean, unless you've already got maybe a more defined comedic voice, which often happens if you're a bit older, then you've already got that self-confidence.
A couple of natural people who are comfortable with their own voice and find it a lot sooner for whatever reason, right? They find that earlier.
The more common progression is that you just suck for a while, for like a long time,
and you have to be. You're
not very good. And you've got
keeping
to
going when you suck.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to find.
You have to keep going,
and I think
something in yourself to just keep like, there's something like I'm sure I am kind of fun, or like there's something about this that I find funny, and I've just got to work out how to explain it so that other people understand why I find it funny, and maybe they get on board and then they find it funny.
And also understanding that is also part of it.
Yeah.
And I remember someone made the analogy that it's like comedy and maybe other arts, but I think comedy specifically is more like a sport than people realize. Like, it is about
What?
like I think
Why am I so unfit then?
I don't have any medals.
we can get them, I guess. We could start doing trophies.
Yeah,
but
that's true. There's a few competitions.
Yeah, like seeing the little gigs is more like training. Like, you know, it's like and going like the good training and the bad training. It's all part of it.
Yes.
And I think that was a big thing for me when I started. Is that
That's true.
the bombs would like sit with me for so long, and I wouldn't go back for a while. And it's like, oh, the longer you leave it, the more you're just sitting with that feeling. So I think for him, it was like, I just said like, look, you know, you will feel like that because, you know, I think in comedy you're so sure of yourself, and then it's kind of like, all right, like you said, you don't know how to communicate your ideas to make them relatable. And it's this whole process. So I think I would recommend it to someone, because if you have that thing in you that you want to do this stuff, that is kind of part of it. Because, you know, I think we all go from being like, you know, all comedians, I should say, go from being someone that's like funny with your friends, and you're funny with your friends because you have this shared history and these shared values, and then you go to performing to people you don't know and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, so then you go like, all right, how do I explain this so more people understand it? And then you go through that whole process. So that is just because being funny and being a comedian are two
totally different
ways of being funny. Like being funny with your friends is different to being funny on stage.
And vice versa. I mean, I know a lot of comedians that are just they're not fun
funny
to talk to.
Or sad.
And there's also just no.
Well, there's a lot of introverts as well, so it's just such a different. They're not like. Like a different
to a party.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was just thinking about when you were talking then, you know, to your that man who's an aspiring comedian. It's kind of like with any arts, and we had another guest on the show who was talking about artists working to have or having rigor with their art, which is like an arts practice, you know. And you think of it, say, if you were a potter or practicing pottery and you just kept like not making the bowl right and, you know, it was all wonky, you wouldn't just go like, well, maybe you would. You'd discard it and say, like, I'm not going to do this ever again. I'm terrible. It's like that thing you were saying. I know there's a C. I know I can get it to be round and useful and can hold cereal one day. And I just need to keep going and perfecting it. But we all take practice. But what's especially hard is with like stand up, and the same is acting, I guess, is it's such a personal thing too. And I mean, singing is the same, or, you know, when someone tells you you suck, it's like they're not saying that bowl sucks because it's not round. It's really hard to separate, oh, it's me, it's my spirit, or it's my talent, or I'll never be able to get there. But actually it just takes some time and hard work and discipline sometimes, and we have to separate that very fragile part of ourselves. Not take it on.
Well, it's
so
even like how
personally.
you were talking about like the band, that it was like, well, no one was quite like, it wasn't quite a there wasn't one person that was a distinct songwriter yet. Like you could have stayed together and then be like, okay, so we need to work on it. If one of us is gonna like you just need to practice. I guess you have to I guess a lot of like punk, or not just punk bands, but a lot of musicians, like, unless they're incredibly lucky, they don't just write a hit straight away. You have to practice it.
It's
and
a
your
skill
first
set like anything.
your first couple of releases might not be so great, but there's like the hint of something. There's like a riff, or there's something in there that's like, oh wow, that was actually good. And I just need to work on making the chorus and all the other bits good.
Well, that was a big thing with I guess reflecting on the band was like, oh yeah, we didn't work hard enough. Like we didn't practice enough. We didn't get in the same room together enough. And we, you know, so I think some of the guys in the band were a bit like, maybe a bit jaded, and we're like, oh, I should have made it by now, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, there's no deciding when that will
separate,
happen. But,
that.
And having that practice around it is, I think so many people want the shortcut. Yeah. And that there is, some people are talented and they are instantly funny and they really make it. That's always going to happen.
Yeah.
But that's not the majority of people.
No.
Majority of people need to work at it, and it is about, you see people on stage and you're like, oh, that looked effortless, and it's like, no, it like that probably
was 10 years,
10 years
or
of
like
writing.
longer.
It's like you were saying, crafting the story. Like,
Yeah.
with your bits now and the direction you're taking it, it's just your storytelling, and that takes real craft and real practice to craft the story, to get the different points, to it's
there's
skills.
no way around not having a practice. Like I think like for me it's taken a long while to,
for sure.
when initially what really served me, but when I was doing lots of gigs, was like I was just getting on stage a lot, and that really served me at the time, and I became really good at being on stage. And now I realize I need to really work on my writing practice and being like disciplined with that. And also just realizing like that, finding, because often writing feels like a chore, and I will put anything ahead of it.
It's so hard, isn't it? I find that too. I've tried to write and oh golly,
because it's sitting with yourself, and like that. There are so many distractions,
and also
now.
knowing that you've just got to sit there and you've got to like just churn through the shit ideas.
I know.
Yes.
So that you
reread
can
like what you did last time. You're just like, that's bloody awful.
So that you can get through it. Yeah. I mean, someone described it as like fishing. Like you've just got to sit there and you've just got to do it. You've just got to actually, you've got to be there. Well, yeah, exactly. I guess. But you've got to be there at the pond or at the lake. You've just got to sit there and you've got to keep casting. You've got to keep writing stuff. And then eventually you might be fishing all day. You might be sitting at your computer all day and all you've got is this one like little snippet of a thing. But you wouldn't have got that snippet if you weren't sitting all day like doing it.
Exactly.
And
it's just like allowing yourself to be shit.
Yeah.
Like just going like that's part of it. Because so much, whether it's social media or whatever.
I was going to say,
you see the best
really
version
hard.
of it.
Yeah. And it's really hard to do that in social media of like, oh, you've just got to make like whatever sketch or whatever idea and just put it out there.
Yes.
Because it's never going to be perfect. Or like we've just got to kind of do it.
Social media is almost like the worst thing for this, isn't it? Yeah. And the best thing. Obviously, it brings people a lot of publicity, but it's really fostering this idea that everyone's brilliant all the time and then it's not okay to fail. But creative people need to fail all the time, like 98% of the time, to find the great idea.
And it is so public, like and
perplexing thing.
And like not having control of it anymore is a big thing. Like I recently had a video online do okay and it got lots of comments and
brag. Okay.
Yeah, sorry to brag. But it was a bit of a, I would say like poison chalice, because it's like you hope that happens. Yeah. And then it happens and you're like, there's a bunch of people that like didn't quite get it. And it's like, well then a bunch of people did. So it's okay. I've kind of got them. Yeah. But you've got to also have this, the flip side of it, double-edged sword of like, there's a bunch of people who see it, who comment it, didn't get it, don't get your style, and you're like, all right, well, I'm okay with that. Yeah. Because they're not going to come
back. Isn't that thing of like, never read the comments, Ben? Like, never read the comments.
Some of them are quite good.
Crazy, right?
Yeah. And
some of them are good. So some of them are good, some of them are negative, and then a bunch are just crazy.
Well, I would say most of them are overly positive. And then there's just a few weird ones that were like, this is just an unhappy person. Yeah. And there's plenty of those people online. Yeah. Like, and yeah. But it's such a.
Yeah, it's working out how to deal with it, but also like not that
in a
let
constructive
that
way
affect you. Yeah.
Not letting it get to you. Like, I think I was talking about that show that I went to where I did a comedy show and then went and played a band show.
Yeah, and then you got reviewed.
Got this bad review.
Did you end up emailing the reviewer being like, I'm going to find out where you live?
Well, I wanted to. I wrote this big response to it.
Oh, wow.
And
like to just for him or like online comment?
I was going to send it to him and then I sent it to a friend of mine and he was like, I understand these feelings, but don't send this.
That's a good friend.
It was a really good friend, but it was also a really good moment. And I'm glad it happened then. Yeah. Because a friend of mine, another comedian, she got a really bad review during comedy festival, and reading the review, I would say it's quite unfair, and it's quite a targeted review at her.
Yeah.
And it really knocked
and you
it.
do definitely get those reviewers that are just like,
well, they're also trying
they've
to
got a different
make a name for themselves. Like, well, not a name, but they're also trying to like have an article that
we're trying to be good at their job and have people read their articles, I guess.
And you know, being a divisive reviewer is a way to get ahead, and you know, and I'm sure maybe they felt like that.
Yeah.
But also realizing like, I'm glad that thing happened with that review back then, because now if I've got reviews or I see comments, I'm like, that comment is not really about me. It's about them.
Yeah.
And you can kind of section that away a bit, I think. So,
definitely.
And that's just part of doing creative work, or doing creative work publicly.
Yes.
And trying to find an audience.
Kind of like trying 100%. To settle with the idea that like you're never like not everyone is going to like you. Like no matter what you do, not everyone is going to like you. Some people are more vocal about it, but you never, it's like I don't like everyone. So why would I expect?
You don't like a lot of people.
Well, and you wouldn't want, like, you wouldn't want to be, you know, for me, I realize that it's like, I don't want that mass popularity in terms of,
I don't want to
be
It's easy
to say that from this position.
No, like, but I understand what you mean. You don't want to be someone that's just it's like for the sake of So it's like, you're so appealing broadly that like you actually don't have anything, I don't know, like specific. I don't know. I think it's more rewarding to have your own specific audience. I mean, but that's easy to say when you don't have mass appeal.
What's interesting to see how
you say that now, but in 20 years' time, someone will share you on some new media format.
Well, it's interesting looking at someone like, I don't know, Dave Hughes, for instance. He's like a massive comedian.
Yeah.
And he's on radio. A lot of people have opinions about him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see him in the room, he's a great comic, and he's never stopped doing comedy.
Yeah.
And he knows how to work a room, and he gets big laughs. I remember doing a gig with him in Notting Hill Hotel like ages ago, and the room was like tore the roof off the place, and it's like, this guy's still got it, but he's got that live skill, and it's like, that's not always going to translate to breakfast radio, like, and you've got millions of people listening to you, or maybe not millions anymore on breakfast radio, but a heap of people listening to you.
I think a couple.
And people are going to have, you know, he's shit, he's not funny, and it's like, And it's so humor is so subjective that it's like
everyone's very opinionated about what's funny
more than anything.
And these days, like offended, don't you? Like people get offended so much about stuff. It's really that would really
can make it really
I hate offending people, or I hate like
Oh well, of course. Like I mean, that's a pretty
like,
normal. Like you don't want to make someone feel so like offended and bad.
But people seem to get offended so easily these days.
Well, I found putting this video up, people's media literacy is lower than it's ever been. It feels like it's like, you know, I had
like don't understand that it's like satire or like
or like that there's, you know, a bit of a like tongue in cheek kind of like, it's subtle like and maybe that's like, okay, well, you're gonna get that when you do that sort of thing, and also I think also going like, all right, well, now that I've put work out, I know what I need to do for the next thing, or like how I want to alter my voice a bit. So there's just no way around.
So it can't be misinterpreted the way you don't want it to be. Like, you can't control how everyone interprets everything, but
that's it. And I think there's no way around it with this sort of stuff. No. It's like, if you're performing live, there's always going to be people in the audience that like don't get it.
Yeah.
And sometimes
often
that's
you can
about,
tell if they don't get it.
Yeah,
because there's immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Either they're not laughing, you're like, oh, okay, so let's explain that differently, or it's like, or they can be like annoying and heckle or whatever.
And sometimes they're just not your people. So it's hard to know when it's one or the other. Like that's the challenge for us. But I think, and also like I guess putting something out after the fact as well. You've recorded it, you've put it out, you've made it. Then you just have to do it for the next thing. Yeah, it's a weird thing to figure out. So I mean, my opinion and my feeling about it is just constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Like if I could go back and talk to myself at the start, there'd be so much that I'd be like, all right, mate. And I guess talking to this younger guy, I was able to go like, all right, you know, you're feeling that way about the open mics. Like this is what it's like. It was nice in a way to go like, you know, I don't think I have all the answers or anything like that. It's just what I've figured out, and you can take it or leave it. But it's nice to be able to go like, don't worry about that. Just focus on yourself and focus on you being a creative. Like, don't get in the weeds with that stuff.
Yeah. Focus on your like authenticity with,
So it's challenging.
Yeah. Do you we kind of talked about it, but like the viewing it as a hobby kind of aspect of it. Do you view like comedy, like, I guess, would you say you're it's a career, or like, do you think it
took me a long while to actually
phrase it as like, well, it's I don't know, you have different skills and different hobbies.
It took me a while to say that I was a comedian. I think I sort of felt like I had to earn it a bit. And then
I think that's, I mean, I've said it before. That it's like I think maybe different to like acting or something, because once you've acted in something, you can say, well, I'm an actor,
I'm a professional actor.
But like, just because you've gotten on stage, like, you know, at open mics, you're not like, well, I'm a comedian.
I don't know.
So I don't think
like, if I'm not like acting in something, I still go like, am I ever going to be an actor again? Or, you know, like, I feel like I still it's so wrapped up in our identity that it's confusing. It's a constant.
Well, you need that constant
questioning. And
I guess that's true.
I mean, it's not all I am. It's certainly not even like most of what I am. It's just like something I do, but, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's what we all have, you know, we're all multifaceted people. And it's like, and it's also like a recency thing as well. Like, you know, and do you have the evidence to say that for me, doing lots of gigs was like, oh, that's evidence that I am a comedian. And or getting booked on certain shows was like, all right, well, I've moved up to this and I can say that. So, I mean, for me, it's definitely not, I would say it's gone way beyond a hobby. It's, you know, taken over a fair portion of my life. Like, and I've sort of structured my life around it.
Do you think, well, do you have hobbies outside of that as well? Like, do you think it's good to actually have a balance in life, even if you are pursuing that as being like, okay, I think I'm a comedian, this is my own monologue. I am a comedian. I think I am.
I know, I do comedy. I'm a farmer. I'm milking a cow, and I'm doing comedy.
My hand is inside a cow right now. I'm surely a farmer.
Take us through.
But even when you're like, do you think it's better to have a balance and like to have different hobbies as well? I don't know.
I mean, I think now more than ever, it's. I mean, it is hard to have that balance as well. Like, I think, you know, to do like,
especially with, I mean, even just you describing all this outside stuff of comedy. It's not even just like that you can be a stand-up comedian. You have to do all this marketing. You have to do the social media, and so then all this other stuff takes up so much time that. It's hard to find.
I would say that aspects of the comedy stuff is a hobby to me. Like, I guess the stand-up is, for me, is the work. That's the But I still get enjoyment out of that, and I would still say it. I mean, it sort of becomes this thing where, if I was making money off comedy to an extent where it was paying for everything, then I would think I would have time outside of that to have a different hobby. Whereas at the moment, it's like, well, I'd be working during the day, and then comedy is the thing that I'm doing at night and on the weekends.
Yeah.
So that it's just for a long time I was like, yeah, I have the very busy hobby of comedy.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, this is almost like a second job.
Yeah.
It's like working 2 jobs.
Yeah, yeah.
One of them is fun and is about performing and things like that. But I wouldn't say I have another thing outside of that.
Like something that you just do to relax, like knit.
Yeah. Well, I have.
You don't knit?
I have thought about something like that, like creative. What am I doing outside of that to kind of get? I'm just doing this for fun.
Recreation.
Yeah, and weirdly, I've kind of not weirdly, but like I've thought about like pottery or something like that, or
Get
just
the pottery
something.
wheel out.
Yeah, very, and also just something tactile that's like
Oh, it's the
Gardening.
best.
Yeah.
That's what I'm into.
Yeah.
Now we're talking.
Well, yeah, something where you're able to like you can sort of switch your mind off a little bit and just
Definitely.
be. So I'm trying to have more of that to go like, all right, it's not, and something away from screens and something away from because it's so tempting to just I love movies, so it's tempting to just go like, all right, I'm just going to watch a movie in my time off, but doing something that is. And I've got a little bit of that from the different work and stuff that I've been doing recently because I've just been doing odd jobs and stuff. Like a little while ago now, I helped a mate drive up to Sydney to install this. He like makes stuff, installations for brands and things like that. And he'd built this hand painted sign and stuff for this company. And I went up and drove up and did that with him. And it was fun to just kind of do something very tactile and just like help install that. And, the other week I drove around a bunch of bands for a music festival. It was like just such a random.
You were the roadie.
Sort of, yeah. It was just this random.
Kind of forget sometimes how many different jobs there are, right? And how there's so many different ways of like earning a crust when you need to and different experiences.
Yeah.
Or also just
Like,
putting enough things together to kind of have that freedom. But a hobby is like, I guess for so long it was comedy and then it got so busy that it's like, I mean, I guess some people would say,
maybe it's just listening to music for you.
Yeah, well,
I would almost say that.
Going
and watching
bands is I would say the biggest thing for me.
How you like relax and
and I guess kind of doing the podcast in a way for me, even though it serves comedy, it is a bit of that because it facilitates like, well, I'm going to more shows because of the podcast because it's like, oh, well, I want to be involved and it's like a nice thing that's very separate from comedy because it's like if that's all you're doing and sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe spend more time socially with comedians and I do that, but it's good to have that separation, I think. So it's hard to say. Often I'm like,
you need more minutes in the day.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing as well. It's like all of us are so it's hard to survive at the moment as well. Like in terms of things are so expensive. And
definitely
the other thing.
Monetarily invest in a hobby is
and it's
pretty
pretty luxurious.
To make the money to just get by, doesn't it? So it is just time.
And thinking back to a time when a lot of artists were on welfare and there was like a way to be an artist and
afford to live in Brunswick.
Yes, exactly. Whereas now it's hard to who can do that?
Right.
And it's like there's always this thing of
everyone
like
moved to Castlemaine or something, and now no one can even afford to live there.
Yeah, it was no houses. No. They're all Airbnbs. But there's always the classic thing of like you're like, oh man, this comedian's going well. They're doing all this thing, and it's like someone's like, oh, they got rich parents. You're like, ding, 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 ding.
Exactly.
There it is.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, their parents bought them an apartment. Oh, that explains it.
So there's always
that's
those.
Just like the way of life, though. Not even just comedians, isn't it?
Oh, big time.
It's just their parents could afford to send them to this school. And they got this, and they go to uni, and they, it's just that is.
It's not unique to.
Well, also
the
like
comedy world.
Political activism. A lot of people that do that. The same way. It's like those are people that have the time and things like that. So it's like, well, at least
you're like, well, how do they fit it in? Oh, okay, they've got an allowance from parents.
So and I think it's just very hard to be a creative in these times, and I think but yeah, you keep doing it because there is value in it. I guess as much as, you know, society doesn't value that as much. It values, you know, you got to be productive. You got to be, you know, we live in a country where there's supposed to be this sort of stuff where, you know, we're supposed to have creative stuff. There should be enough money going around. You know, if we tax our mining companies, probably, you know, I'm going off the deep end here. But yeah, you're like that. We should be able to do all these things. It's like, it's not like, all right, well, we can't have arts anymore. Like,
it's a real core part of your, you know, modus operandi.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, it's the thing that really helps us connect to each other. And that's valuable.
So you don't feel like you've given up anything? Like, I feel like in our maybe like, you know, a generation ago or something, they'd be like, oh, you have to give up so much to pursue an acting career or like a creative. Yeah, exactly.
To pursue
You're
this
like,
rather than,
and
know,
they might be really
job.
worried that a creative person is pursuing that avenue because like, oh, they're not going to live a good life or they're giving something up. Do you ever feel
like you've been able to have the sensible job?
I guess
creative.
that's
I think it's interesting. Like, I think maybe like if I would say anything, it's interesting because you do.
I mean, it's also such a frame of mind. I mean, like, you know. But
because sacrifice,
how do you
I
know
guess,
what
is
you're
like
giving up.
like
if you're content, then you're not. Yeah.
Like for me, I mean, I feel like I'm still able to pursue this stuff because, I mean, I don't have a family, I don't have a mortgage, that kind of stuff. Like it's like the only person this affects is me.
Yeah.
Like if it doesn't go well, well, I can just go back and get a job. And whereas I'd understand if someone had kids or they had a significant other that, you know, you've got to. There are certain responsibilities. For me, I'm still able to make that choice because of the choices I have made.
Yeah.
So I still feel comfortable. But if, you know, someone turned around the other day and said, like, you've got a kid on the way, I'd be like, all right, well, time to maybe compromise a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe it is just a compromise. And maybe it's like, well, I'm not going to perform live as much. And maybe it's more of an online thing or, you know, and it's still about having that creative outlet for me.
That you can pivot as well.
Yeah.
Like pivoting isn't
Just
necessarily giving up.
I think.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you know, you get so much from having kids and like
exactly.
So it's not something you go like, oh, I'm going to have to sacrifice this, but you just do it, right?
Well, so many people do. Yeah.
And, you know, you just do it. Like you just you know, wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, and it's just like
just find another way of achieving the same thing.
It might look a little bit different to what you thought, and then it might be way better.
Yeah,
because I think we think that, you know, having all these options is great, but sometimes the best things come from having narrow options.
For
like
sure.
you
sort
really
of forces you to be creative.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're like, well, this is still very important to me, so I'll still do it in this way. And I think, you know, like so many that comparing yourself to other people is such a trap to fall into because it's like, all right, it's got to look like this, it's got to look like that.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's taken me a long time to get there because I still fall into that.
I still do it.
Yeah.
You feel like you've got there?
Yeah. Oh no, I think it.
God. You're just this zen.
Yeah.
No, I think it's more of a it takes maintenance. Like you know, it's sometimes like I'll notice
like
that
sometimes you'll have that thought. You're like, oh no, let's go back down. They haven't taken any opportunity away from you. It's not like this one opportunity and now you don't have anything.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's like, you know,
it's a real scarcity mindset.
Gotta,
isn't
like,
it? Because it's like, oh, if they've got this, then that means I've missed out on that. Rather than going, they've got this awesome thing. Imagine I'd love to also get that awesome thing. Or that's so great for them and that's happening in the world. And that, you know what I mean? It's just like that's more opportunities now for everyone. Rather than going, it's less. Like they've taken the thing that I wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just, it's a total mind
teaching yourself.
Set.
Yeah.
It's and it takes, you know, I find that it takes energy to keep that up.
Yeah.
Because you're like, it's easy to just be like, why the fuck did they? And you know, I sometimes find myself sulking into that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's not how I want to be. That's not how I want to approach the world. The way I want to approach it is like, fuck, that's awesome for them. And how could I try and get my own version of that? Or you know, what does that look like for me? And or no, I have done these things. I've done this, I've done that. And reminding yourself that everyone's on their own path because
and that you've set your own milestones as well. Like it's good to have, it's important to have goals. You're like, well, actually I did do that thing. I did that gig that a year ago I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do it. And
and it's a classic grass is always greener because it's like, oh, that person got that opportunity, but their personal life is a fucking mess. Like,
well,
that's 9 times out of 10.
My mental health is a lot better. So
creatives, it's often the case, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
big time.
Well, like, well, they've sacrificed their own well-being to get that far.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, actually, I haven't, sacrificed that. So,
because that's sometimes what it takes is like the thing that people don't see. It's like that struggle, like that, and we all know a version of that. And some of those people have gone like, well, I'm willing to accept that to go to this. Whereas like I know that for me, things in my life need to be good for comedy to be good because otherwise I'm up on stage and it's like people are like, there's something off with that guy. So it's like you need to be looking after yourself as well because I mean, you know, mental health stuff is bigger than ever, like because it's like it's an easy trap to fall into. Just like, all right, when I get this thing, that will be when I'll be happy. And it's like, no, you need to be happy along the way.
Yeah,
it's such an important thing to discover, isn't it? Yeah.
Takes a long time to learn. I came to it probably later than I should have.
I'm still learning.
Practice.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Positive note.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming in
Thanks,
and sharing
Searle.
your journey.
Thanks very much.
Your journey.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Anything you want?
A lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Anything you want to promote?
Melbourne Comedy Festival, but
Woohoo!
check me out. My website is searle.net, so check that out.
.net. Oh.
I got the .net. Yeah, I thought that was funnier.
Take it and run with it.
Or Instagram is @Searle_.
I think I'm a .net too.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I love it.
I'm a .com.
.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why I went
old school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought .net was just funny. Yeah, I was like.
Did you have the choice and you chose the .net? Because
you got like
I think maybe
.AOL or something.
There is like a doctor that is Ben Searle. And I think maybe they've got .com. But Searle, I don't think was any
dramas.
Some prick has @Searle with no underscore on Instagram and Twitter and stuff.
What an asshole.
Yeah,
the life that you could have had.
Yeah. But
anyway,
no, just those things.
Lovely.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Searle. Love
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you liked us, please tell a friend or two. Apparently that's how these things work. We want to acknowledge the incredible stories, culture, resilience and creativity of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, in particular the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, where this podcast is recorded. Thank you also to Chris Pickering for the music and Vincent Pickering for the logo and animations. And yes, they are our brothers. We're everywhere.